Hey, cool cats and kittens. Just wanted to touch base with you guys and give you a little feedback about the DBQ that you just had some practice with, the Sub-Saharan African DBQ between 1200 and 1450. So again, like I said in my video from last week, I highly recommend that when we get to the point where you're going to be taking this DBQ online, that you have some kind of planning document, a paper and a pen or pencil with you as you have your computer out and you're looking at the documents online, so that you can kind of organize your thoughts, jot down some quick ideas, and then you'll be able to tackle and get through the DBQ a little bit quicker. So here's the one that I've provided you guys. Y'all have worked with this online, but I went ahead and printed a copy for myself. And so if it were me and I was under a timer, I had a 45-minute timer, and I wanted to get through these documents and kind of jot down the gist of some of these documents really quickly, and then come up with some kind of idea for what I think my two topic sentences would be. And I think that's on this side, the other side. Actually, my two topic sentences are going to be on the other side of the paper, but then I'll have this here. So I just kind of want to walk through this and show you kind of how I would approach these documents. Okay, so obviously for document one, the Mansa Musa, the ruler of Mali, the emperor of Mali, the document talks about, the majesty of wealth of the Mali empire. He's on his way to Egypt. He's giving away a lot of money. So to me, first thing that jumps out of my head here is the idea of trade and wealth. Mali's so wealthy that they're able to just basically flood Egypt. And but it also mentions how he's kind of going there to the court. He's making connections. He's basically serving not only the role of an emperor, but also kind of as a diplomat. So maybe I'm just going to real quickly jot down diplomacy as well. Maybe that I could use that idea here in a second also. Now, how I would approach this in terms of sourcing this document or soaping this document? I would basically look at, okay, what is the source line giving me? He's the ruler of Mali, so I know his occupation, I know his role, I know he's very powerful, I know he's very wealthy, and I know that this is happening during the 1300s, the 14th century, so I kind of understand the context. This is toward the end of the medieval period. I also know that he's making a Hajj, which I remember from my classwork. I remember that the reason he's going through Egypt is he's traveling from West Africa and Mali to get to Mecca on his pilgrimage. So along the way, he's giving away lots of gold and lots of money, and he even makes contact with some of these governments. So but the important thing here to remember is that Mansa Musa himself is not writing this document, is he? It's actually an Egyptian official in the court, the royal court of Egypt, who's saying these great things about Mansa Musa and how he's, so generous, and he's providing all this wealth, et cetera, et cetera. Now, there's a couple of ways that I might look at approaching this. I might talk about purpose here, right? Why would this court official, talk about how generous Mansa Musa is? Well, maybe he's doing it to flatter, Mansa Musa, in hopes that maybe he comes back and that maybe he establishes relations with that country. And, maybe that's his other purpose as a court official. Maybe he has some kind of diplomatic role. And it's okay to say, and perhaps, yada, yada, yada. As a court official, he may be serving some kind of diplomatic function or role as well. And so maybe that his purpose is to flatter him and make, positive relationships with Mansa Musa. What I would probably use, however, is my knowledge about why is Mansa Musa in Egypt in the first place. I would use context or occasion. Okay, he's on his way to Mecca. He's doing his Hajj, his pilgrimage that every faithful Muslim is going to do at least once in his life. And along the way, he's brought so much gold with him in his caravan and his entourage, and he's giving so much away that he is causing inflationary pressures, and it is causing a lot of happiness and in good regard to Mansa Musa, but is also causing some economic problems for people in those regions as well. Okay, so for document 2, the writer is a dude by the name of Leo Africanness, and he is describing Timbuktu, which is a very famous major metropolitan city in the Mali Empire, if you recall. And it's also a place that's home to a great library, and scholars from all over the Mediterranean and North Africa and even the Middle East travel to Timbuktu to study. So Leo Africanness is a traveler and a writer. Now, what's interesting about him is that he's actually born in a city or a region that is also known for its scholarship, Al-Andalus, if you remember back during the Umayyad and then later the Abbasid period of Spain. That was a place that had a lot of universities established and a lot of centers of learning. And so he's coming from that particular area. And he's also writing about what it's like there in the Mali Empire with a little bit of admiration in the tone of his document. But we'll get to that when we get to SOAP here in just a second. But first of all, what does he say about Mali? He says, well, there are doctors and there are judges. So I'm just going to jot those kind of things down real quickly. There's priests. So we can see, obviously, there's a high level of scholarship and literacy here, learned men. Okay, so that's kind of what I'm thinking about. Well, what is the achievement? What is the achievement in this empire? Maybe I want to approach it and I want to look and use this document for literacy. Or since there's judges here, maybe I want to use this document to show how law and law and order and the rule of law is important in Mali. In terms of soaping this document, as I mentioned, Leo Africanness himself is a writer, so we know that he has a high level of education. He's literate, and he's also from a very well-respected region of the world in terms of, the reputation for having scholarship and universities and literacy. So you might approach it somehow like that in terms of the speaker. So he was a writer himself. From an area of high scholarship as well. And so maybe that is reflected in his admiration for Timbuktu, something like that. But again, another thing that you could use here is occasion, right? If you look at when the document is being written, it says in the 16th century, which is kind of out of the date range of this of period 1. But what do we know about the 1500s? Well, we know this is when the High Renaissance was taking place. We know that when there was, there was a lot of humanistic literary inquiry. So I might use something like that. Literary inquiry, humanism, study of ancient texts, which might have, as a writer, maybe he is, raising his level of renown by showing how well-read and well-traveled and well-learned he is. So something along those lines. But I definitely think Doc 2 would be a good one to soap as well. Okay, now as we get to document 3, you'll notice our good friend Ibn Battuta is showing up, and he is writing this document in his travels, and he's describing what it is like as well in Mali. So just like Leo Africanness, Ibn Battuta would be an outsider's perspective of Mali, but also an admirable, a perspective or a point of view that's admiring of the achievements of Mali. And so he's talking about, their good qualities. There is very little injustice. Here's this idea of justice again. And if you recall, Ibn Battuta himself is a jurist. He's a judge, not only a scholar and a writer and a traveler and a religious pilgrim, but he's also a judge. So he recognizes their system of justice and admires it. He says the Sultan does not forgive anyone in matters to do with justice. And so there's peace in their country, right? So there's peace, justice, law, and order. And that's really the main gist or idea of that document. In terms of soaping the document, as I said, Ibn Battuta, I'm going to call him IB here, is a jurist, is a scholar. And again, one can sense his admiration. I'm going to talk about him being a jurist himself. One can sense his admiration for their sense of law, being a jurist himself. And so you're addressing the speaker's point of view there when you say, you know, you can sense their admiration for their particular role. Okay, our fourth and fifth documents are a little bit different. The fourth document is the Benin document about the bronze sculpture by an artisan, and he's talking about, you know, he's using very religious language in the name of Allah, the compassionate, the merciful. So clearly, he's a devout Muslim here. You could sense that this is a time period when, you know, in the 1400s, when Islam was not only coming to the Mali Empire, but also the Hausa Kingdom as well. But what is the achievement here, right? And so they're talking about how they're using sculpture, that they have wax and metal and lead and fire, and they set aside to cool it. Talk about the process of it, and the clay is broken off, and then have this beautiful figure. And so what I would kind of jot down here in terms of achievements is that not only is there law and order, not only are there these scholarly professions, the doctors, high level of medicine and law, there's also art, right? So that's an achievement. Arts or crafts, sculpture, right? And so we can see that this is kind of a different document than perhaps the first three documents. And so this one is probably going to be in its own different kind of, under a different kind of topic sentence, which we'll deal with here in just a second. In terms of soaping, yeah, you could talk about context here. You could talk about how he was a devout Muslim, which characterized, you know, his outlook during a time. Remember, during is your best friend when you're dealing with historical context. And so during a time period, you know, when Islam was taking hold, or, you know, spreading to West Africa, right? And then finally, our last document is a description of Ghana. Now, Ghana came before the Mali Empire, and generally what the College Board will do when they present you with the documents is they will give them to you in chronological order. The DBQ that I gave you obviously does not do that, because this one is written in the 11th century. So this is actually before the Mali Empire is founded in the 1200s. Nonetheless, it is West Africa. It is a sub-Saharan kingdom, and it does fit within Unit 1. And so it's a really good document to use. Ubaydallah al-Bakri, I think I'm saying that right. And again, here we go. It's another resident of Al-Andalus, of Islamic Spain, of Cordoba. And but what's interesting about this document is he's never actually been to West Africa. He never traveled there himself, so he doesn't have to give you a firsthand account, but he's interviewed a lot of travelers, and based on those interviews and their observations, he's recounting what it was like there. And what does he say it was like there? Well, again, he's talking about you know, towns on a plain, so it's well laid out, it's well planned. They have a bunch of mosques, 12 mosques, to be specific here in this document. They have a well with sweet water, so running water and plumbing and providing fresh water would be an achievement there. They grow their vegetables with it, they drink it. And then, of course, there's a lot of inhabitants. You have a lot of houses. And so there's a lot of reference to architecture here, okay? Now, in terms of soaping this document, you know, obviously, I think you can obviously talk about how this is not a firsthand account. So maybe you write something to the effect of, you know, however, one should approach this document with caution. And you don't have to write all of this out during your planning, but just jot down a couple of ideas. I'm just writing it out for you guys to kind of follow along with my thoughts. However, one should approach this document with caution because, you know, obviously this is not a first-hand account. Doesn't mean that it's invalid necessarily. And try to stay away from, you know, black and white, you know, this is wrong, this is right, they're biased, they're telling the truth, he knows what he's talking about, they don't know what they're talking about. But as a historian, you know, if I'm going to get, you know, evidence about a particular historical development or a place or a person or an event, and my only source is somebody who was never actually there and saw it themselves, I might want to corroborate that document with something else. So it's very valid to say, you know, approach this with caution. Extra documents for corroboration might be needed. And so again, you're critiquing the context here of this document. So once you have kind of the gist of all of these documents kind of jotted down very quickly, and again, you're probably not going to have as much time as I just took to do all of this, and obviously you're not going to be narrating this. So as much as you feel like you need, write it down. If not, just move on and get into the typing. Because again, that timer is going to be going on your computer screen, and it's going to be causing a little bit of anxiety. But if I do this step, if I do this process, now I'm in a position where I can think about, okay, well, what are my 2 topic sentences? What are my 2 groups going to be about? And so just kind of glancing at these documents, you can kind of see, well, these 2 are probably going to be used as types of achievements: arts and crafts, sculpture, mosques, architecture. These are all intellectual achievements of some of these sub-Saharan African kingdoms and empires. And then up here you have you have law, you have judges, you have justice. So I might want to use some kind of political idea, or the idea of jurisprudence, or a set of law and order, some kind of established peace and security under a centralized government. Problem is document 1. What am I going to use about the Mansa Musa document? How the Egyptian guy saying he's so wealthy, he's traveling all over. Well, I'm probably not going to focus. And again, this isn't the only way you can do this, but in terms of how I'm going to group the documents and how I'm going to use them to answer the prompt, I'm going to focus on the diplomacy. I'm going to focus on, yes, they had a wealthy civilization. They also had a strong centralized government that could establish relationships with other countries. It could show their might, their majesty, their wealth, their power. So I think that kind of goes along really well with these other 2 documents. And so now, so up here it says brainstorm answers to prompt. I'm probably just flip to the other side of this, and it gives you a couple places to write your topic sentences if you want to take advantage of that. So topic sentence number 1 might be, there was, you know, one of their achievements. And again, the prompt is, to what extent were they successful in making achievements, right? So you're going to start each topic sentence with, they were successful, moderately successful, they were to a certain extent successful. You want to give some kind of measure, some kind of degree of success. And most of the DBQs you're going to get, guys, in fact, the last 3 years have been that kind of prompt where it's asking you to, you know, make a judgment about the degree to which something occurred, or the degree to which something happened. So in order to get credit for your thesis and your topic sentences and answering the prompt, you've got to give some kind of value judgment there, right? So I would say, yes, they were successful in making achievements. In that, and then here's my first topic sentence, in that they possess stable, stable centralized governments, which established peace, security, with a, sorry about my handwriting, developed legal system. So to me, those 3 documents, so you're talking about documents 1, 2, and 3, if you're looking at the documents while I'm going through this, all kind of fall into that, you know, they weren't just these backward places, these little tribal areas that were not as advanced as European and Middle Eastern and South Asian and East Asian societies. They also had strong centralized governments, and that's evidenced in those documents. Now, the second topic sentence, I'm probably going to talk about the intellectual achievements. So again, they were also successful in making achievements. That's how I'm going to start both this topic sentence and this. Remember, your topic sentences are little mini thesis statements. So both of these topic sentences need to answer the prompt. Okay, so they were successful in that they possessed, what did they possess? Wealthy cities which were home to renowned centers of learning. Art and architecture. Now, I'm going to say this again. I'm writing all of this out just so you can kind of see my thought process. If you think that, okay, I've got it. I've got judicial, I've got intellectual, and then you can flesh this out and type this out and write this out on your Google Doc, and then copy and paste it into the HTML page where your test is going to be uploaded. If you can just kind of wordsmith that along the way instead of writing it out perfectly on this piece of paper, which is not going to be looked at all, then do that, okay? Don't waste all your time doing what I'm doing. So docs to support that, obviously the last two documents. However, you could also use document 2. If you recall, document 2 talked about how there were different professions, doctors and priests and learned men. It was talking about Timbuktu, etc. So that's also centers of learning. You don't have to use it twice, but you could because you've already used document 2 over here, but it also fits over here. Just keep in mind that this is a timed assessment. In terms of outside evidence, if you haven't used some of the outside evidence that I mentioned as we were going through the SOAPs, because you're only going to have to SOAP 2 documents, so some of those other things you could still use as outside evidence if you don't actually source those documents or SOAP those documents. Like we mentioned, the Hajj, Mansa Musa was going to Mecca. So that's not given to you in the document. So you could talk about how his destination was the Middle East. Along the way, he encountered the Egyptian government. You might also bring up, do y'all remember that, that atlas, the Catalan Atlas? It's that famous medieval atlas that was made in I believe it was the 14th century, and it has Mansa Musa, this king in Africa, in West Africa, and he's holding this huge gold nugget, or the stone, and he's got a medieval European king's crown on. And that's really all that Europeans knew about Mansa Musa. He's this rich guy down in Africa. We talked about how Ibn Battuta was comparable to Marco Polo. We talk about their journeys and the context. Talk about the context of Renaissance, humanism. For that one particular document, you might flesh that out a little bit more, talking about the end of the medieval period, and how there was a intensification of scholarship during that era. And then, in terms of outside evidence for some of these, these last couple of documents, you could bring in the Wells, you could bring in Al-Andalusian society, you could bring in, I think we talked about the Umayyads and the Abbasids. So there's a lot of outside evidence. If you kind of jot some of those things down as you're planning, you can bring those in very, very quickly as well. So now that I have my 2 topic sentences, what I think I'm going to have my 2 paragraphs to be about, I'm ready to get into my first paragraph, my introduction. And again, your introduction is composed of your contextualization and your thesis. So I've been grading some of your contextualizations, a lot of good ideas. I would caution you and also remind you that in order to get credit for the contextualization, you do have to hit these 3 checkpoints. So bring in the time and place. You have to have some kind of specific historical evidence or development that is not in the documents themselves or in the prompt or in the idea of the thesis. So bring in some big idea, big picture, historical development. And then you also have to, in order to get credit for this, you have to show a link to how that's relevant to whether or not these kingdoms and empires were successful in making achievements. Okay, so a good way to do that is to write out the words, this allowed for, or this led to, and then whatever it is, and then write your thesis, okay? So in my mind, what I would probably do as I approach this is I would probably talk about trade, because trade is what made these empires and these kingdoms wealthy. And so the trade route that reaches West Africa is the Trans-Saharan Trade. Or I think Strayer calls it the sand roads. Okay, and you could talk about camels. You could talk about gold salt trade. Any of these things. You could bring in how the Berbers, or those North African peoples that first penetrated down into, went across the Sahara and made contact with those West Africans. You might also talk about how they're all unified by Islam, whether they're in Mali or Egypt or the House of Kingdoms. They're all influenced and kind of held together and unified by that Islamic civilization, that Islamic religion. And so we have learned that that is called the Dar al-Islam, or House of Islam. No matter where you were in the world, merchants, traders, travelers, pilgrims were welcome by other Muslims, whether it was in the Indian Ocean or Indonesia or West Africa. They were all welcome. They were all part of the club, if you will. And so that unity, not only was trade a unifying element, which led to the achievements of some of these, the accomplishments of some of these African kingdoms and empires. So it was trade, but also religion.